Hello everyone, I'm Bill Wolfen, Associate Publisher and Editorial Director at American City and County, and your moderator today for Understanding Your Assets, our webinar. This webinar is brought to you by Dude Solutions. Before we get started, let me explain how you can get the most out of this event. To improve your viewing and listening experience, you can move your webcast windows around by dragging on the title bar or resize them by clicking on their lower right corner. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find multiple application widgets. In fact, a copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the Resource List widget. The logos you see on your console, including the Dude Solutions logo, are hyperlinked. If at any point you would like to visit the corresponding website, you can click on any logo and a new window will open. This will not take you out of the webinar. Of course, we welcome your questions about our topic and will answer as many as we can following the presentation. But feel free to submit yours to the queue at any time. Just type your question into the Q&A window on the left-hand side of your screen and hit the Submit button. Also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You're going to be notified by email when that archive is available. Now, let me introduce today's speakers. First is Luke Anderson, who is an Enterprise Solutions Consultant with Dude Solutions. Joining Luke today will be TJ Emberger, who serves as Parks, Public Grounds, and Public Works Director with Spalding County, Georgia. The third speaker is Felicia Camp, who is Parks, Public Grounds, and Public Works Administrative Assistant with Spalding County. You can find more information about Luke, TJ, and Felicia by clicking on the Speaker Bio widget at the bottom of your screen. So with that, let's get started. Luke, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have everyone here. We hope to have a nice interactive podcast-like conversation today, so hopefully we can have a little fun, learn a little bit. The agenda today, we're going to take just a couple of minutes here at the beginning, get to know TJ and Felicia, a little bit of their background, a little bit of what they're experiencing at Spalding. We've got three main topics we're going to talk about today. The first is going to be the changing workforce and how technology plays a role. We're going to be talking about a single source of information and how Spalding County and other communities have centralized data into one area. And then finally, we'll talk about different teams and different uses, how technology applies differently to different people, and how an individual government or municipal organization has a lot of different needs across a lot of different areas. Finally, we'll spend a couple of minutes just telling you about who the Dude Solutions is, and we'll just take a look at kind of what we mean when we say inside and outside the building. So let's start with just getting an understanding of TJ and Felicia. So Spalding County, located in the great state of Georgia. TJ, Felicia, do you guys want to give just a quick bio and a little background on yourselves and a little bit about Spalding County?
Sure. Thank you, and glad to be here with you, Luke. My name is TJ, and we have Felicia with us. I'm the Director of Parks, Public Grounds, and Public Works. It was a combined division that Spalding County did 2 years ago to combine several public services divisions. Spalding County is located about 40 miles directly south of Atlanta, and we've been using a software program to assist us with solving problems for 6 or 7 years now. And we also have with us Felicia. She serves as our administrative assistant for our Parks and Public Grounds division. She is one of two of our main administrators for our software solutions, and I serve as the other one.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and TJ, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that even though your title is director, Felicia probably runs most of the show, doesn't she?
Well, absolutely. Isn't that how it's supposed to work?
That's in most places, yeah, absolutely. And
yeah,
everyone,
yeah, call her, and then she'll tell me what to do.
That's right. That's right. And I apologize, guys. I forgot to mention John Mills has joined us as well. John is one of the senior folks over here at Dude Solutions who has a great experience with Spalding County, so he's going to be here for our question and answer portion. All right. So I know I briefly mentioned at the beginning here that we're going to focus and we're going to do an interview style with TJ and Felicia specifically about some of the challenges that they have faced and the challenges that frankly are being faced by most of the government entities that we're communicating with and that we're working with. So probably the area that is biggest that we're going to start on first is that changing workforce. This has been lovingly endeared as the silver tsunami. The giant tidal wave of retirements that is coming and is on its way. Talk about recruitment and retention, how technology plays a role. We're going to talk about the centralization of data. That's what we talk about with the single source of truth. And then again, as I mentioned, the different uses for different folks and how that actually applies. So, some statistics on the changing workforce. So 74% of agencies in the United States, this includes public and private, are estimating a skilled labor shortage moving forward. This was done by a survey a couple of months ago by the AGC. Essentially, they're estimating about 30 million vacated positions in the skilled labor trade. The folks that are in educational systems right now, trade schools, colleges, apprenticeships, aren't even close to replacing that amount of vacated positions. Less than 10% of maintenance managers across the government specifically are under the age of 35. Most of the governments we have spoken with, and according to a couple of surveys, are going to have a shortage in the next 5 to 10 years as the baby boomer generation starts to essentially retire and move on. So, the idea here is that the way that you guys retain and the way you recruit, it's changing. If you think about the staff today and how they interact with technology, I also want you to compare that to how technology interacts with other people in your organization that are being either recruited to come in to replace or people in your own family that are using laptops and tablets and computers. The landscape, it's shifting, right? All of the processes that used to be occur in the past are changing. The way that we dispatch, the way that we communicate isn't even the same as it was 10 years ago, right? The proliferation of smartphones and connected devices, smart watches. So technology has created a gap. Right, we have our senior staff that are more technology adverse, but at the same time, we have folks coming in that are very technology savvy. This has created a lot of opportunity. So you aren't accessing information the way you did before. You don't need to rely on somebody's brain or somebody's memory to retain history. Right, digital copies, access online, access in the field, pulling up as-built, pulling up drawings. That type of information is now a reality for a lot of governments and a lot of folks that have taken that step. What's interesting is that this technology concept applies in both arenas, recruitment and retention. So when I talk about recruitment, I want to paint a scenario for you. Imagine you are a 19-year-old skilled trade electrician that is coming out of school and is looking at his next job. He's got a couple of applications. He or she can either go into the private sector or into the government public world. And when they arrive at their first interview, the maintenance director takes them over to the maintenance office and shows them the file cabinet and says, this is where we keep all our records. This is our electronics file cabinet. It has all of the history of every piece of electronic we have in here, all of our panels, all of our connections, all of our disconnects. This is going to be your database moving forward. And then he goes either to another private company or another government, and instead they hand him an iPad. And they say, this is your database. This is what you'll be engaging with on a day-to-day basis. Right? Moving to technology in terms of recruitment, we've seen quite a bit of folks utilize that on that recruiting side. The retention side, it's all about legacy. How do I take the people that have been here for a long amount of time, that love what they do, to make sure that when they leave, they're not taking all of that information with them? We've got to retain that data. We're not going to retain the employee. There's no physical way, right? Retirement's too attractive. Everybody's ready. So how do we keep that data with us? So moving into the first kind of interview question, TJ and Felicia, I've kind of set a little bit of a standard on technology and retirements. I just want to kind of open to you guys to talk a little bit about how Spalding County has dealt with some of the retirements in the past year or two or 5 years, and if and how technology plays a role in dealing with both the retention and the recruitment.
All right, Luke. Yes, we currently we have a retention problem in general. In reference to, just being able to find folks as a whole. What we've experienced in the last 5 to 10 years, and think we're going to even have a greater difficulty in the next 2 or 3 years, is we have a lot of retirements coming. Myself, I've been here 27.5 years, and that's a pretty good average number for our local government. The other thing that we did was about 10 or 15 years ago, we actually had a hiring spree of what I like to call second-generation workers, folks that have retired, you know, relatively young in their 40s and early 50s and have started a second career with us. So this has come to the point where a lot of these folks are going to be retiring. It comes to the folks, you know, where we are going to have to start filling and recruiting for other positions. That has been a big problem for us because right now the market is so strong, especially in the Atlanta area. We're so close to that big metro area that competition is stiff for even for 50 cents a difference an hour. It's been fairly difficult. We've been trying to, you know, move ourselves forward in technology, but we may not have moved as fast as we needed because we had a little bit of an older workforce that didn't have quite that experience from before. So we're seeing some of the same problems that a lot of folks are around the country right now in reference to, you know, our institutional knowledge is leaving us at a rapid pace.
So, TJ, you mentioned the second-generation workers that are, you start seeing this other demographic kind of become a part of the workforce. How have you gotten access to them? Has that been a proactive thing on your part, or are you seeing that reactively, that they're coming to you?
I think it's 50-50. We proactively recruit, you know, especially 5 or 10 years ago, recruited them because of their skill sets. We look for, especially here in Spalding County, we look for specific skill sets with like CDLs and mandated officers. We're kind of unique. We actually run a prison for the state of Georgia. So a lot of our departments evolve around that. So we would actively seek those, and at the time, we were really competitive with pay, so it was easy to get those folks that weren't as concerned about like retirements and that kind of thing. It was like a second income to them because they had full incomes being retired. So we sought that, but then they would seek it for the same reason. You know, we have a lot of retired supervisors, for lack of better terms, department heads, managers, that would come to us for a little bit of a less stressful job, but within the same field that they were retiring from. So we were very fortunate to get a lot of those folks.
TJ, you mentioned earlier, a second ago, you said you guys have invested in technology, but maybe not enough fast enough. Can you talk a little bit about what technology you guys have used and what kind of role that's played there in Spalding?
Yes, I surely can. We've, of course, you know, started looking at software systems specifically for operating anything that was work order driven. We moved from multiple departments that had their own work order systems. I'll throw out a word here. Remember the old access systems, database? Yeah. Well, it wasn't but about 3 years ago that we actually eliminated our, well, actually, about a couple months ago, we eliminated our last access system, and our last major access system wasn't about till 3 years ago. So we've been rolling in other technology to kind of combine all of our data, and we've had a lot of good using things like iPads. That's been very good for us. We're moving into the mobile phone, a lot of smartphones, a lot of folks are getting those. We've gone ahead and added a lot of CPUs, a lot of computer lab type situations to our muster rooms at our different departments, where that every employee has access to a minimum of having at least some type of computer access to look at work orders on a daily basis. We've actually, believe it or not until about 6 months ago, we didn't even have emails for all of our employees. So now every Spalding County employee has a Spalding County email. We were using some other systems up to just recently. So we've been dabbling in all types of technology, but our biggest one right now is moving into mobile, where we're actually getting the technology in the hands of our employees so that we can be a little bit more efficient in getting that data that we need from them in the actual field. We're looking at a lot of live stuff is what our goal is.
Good. Now, this next question, I want to make sure it comes out the right way because I don't want anybody to get thrown under the bus, but you mentioned new email systems, you mentioned computers. What challenges have you had with some of the folks that are maybe not as technology-centric? Have you guys had to do additional trainings? Have you had special sessions? What have you done to help folks that are more technology-averse?
So I'll jump in on that one. Like TJ said, we're getting everybody moving into the cell phones, mobile devices, iPads. We actually still have some of our guys that are still using flip phones. So getting them to adjust to the difference in that has been huge. We started off kind of doing some big group trainings and realized that that wasn't working. So we have to break it down to almost a one-on-one training with them, and sometimes doing the same training multiple times in order for everyone to catch on to it.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And actually, TJ and Felicia, you guys have brought up a great transition into this next kind of area, which is this single source of truth. I want to talk about that database, the Access database you just talked about, TJ, because I think that's the one of the concepts or one of the areas that this term system of engagement versus system of record came from. So when we think about a system of engagement, we want to think about how does a user, a technician, a mechanic, a stormwater operator, how do they actually engage with technology? What programs do they use? What hardware do they use? When we talk about a system of record, we're talking about where does all this information flow into? What is on the back end that does all the analytics and all of the database management of our work? So when you talk about an Access database, for a lot of governments, that is both. It is both their system of engagement and it is their system of record. And that becomes very difficult for people, especially people that are not as technology savvy. So what we've seen, and we've got some examples here, is this shift towards a more simple system of engagement. I had a great example. This was brought to me by a facility director I worked with out in California, who mentioned to me, a great example is this is census data. He goes, before, if you wanted to access census data, you had to access raw census data. Now, if you go onto the Census Bureau website, they have a great little step-by-step, very plain English way to find demographic data or statistic data on the previous census. So even though the system of record hasn't changed, all that census data still lives in a giant database file. How people are engaging with it has changed. That's that system of engagement. Another great example of this is how everybody on the phone here used to do their checkbooks. I know one for me, I was not very good at this part. I would consistently be going to the bank and checking my ATM balance to make sure that my checkbook was accurate because most of the time I didn't keep up with it, right? My system of engagement, the pen and the little notebook paper, like we see in the picture, my handwriting is not that clean, right? I did not have that type of ability to engage. Now, I use Mint. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Mint Mobile, but it's a really easy way. It connects directly with your Wells Fargo or your whatever account, and it gives you all the data you need. What are you spending on groceries? What are you spending on movies? What are you spending on going out to eat? So my system of record is still my bank account, right? Nothing has changed, but I no longer engage with that data in the same way. So when we talk about software, that's what we're talking about. Is we're talking about a system of engagement. So I want to now, again, turn it back to TJ and Felicia. And this question is a three-part question, but I'm going to break it up into little chunks. The first part is, prior to you guys moving towards a standard engagement system, using software on a work order system to make sure things were being captured, how did you guys capture information? How did the day-to-day look prior to having a process in place?
So I'll start us off on that one. This is kind of a funny thing, but when I started here in 1992, we didn't even own computers. We had one typewriter with one typewriter operator in an entire office. So as we moved forward, of course, at that time, everything was handwritten. If you wanted to start new programs or wanted to keep records, we had notebooks, we had a sheet for everything that you did on a daily basis. And then, of course, that all ended up, in our record room, which everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's just a bunch of boxes falling over. And everything was basically done by hand. And then as we started to invest in technology here in Spalding County, going from desktop computers to some other type of software things, we did, especially in maintenance, and specifically we started with software engagement, software and data collection in our parks and public grounds divisions. We were kind of, at the time, we had to do that because we had some specific items that we needed to maintain and get access to. One of those was our state pesticide records. We were getting inspected and just weren't able to find that stuff quick enough, going through boxes and files and that kind of thing. The other thing is that playground inspections. When you're looking at something with such a high liability factor, we needed to make sure that we understood what was happening literally day to day. We needed to go back and be able to answer questions of stuff that we recorded down a year ago or 2 years ago. So this became a situation where we had to find some solutions. Sometimes finding the solutions isn't easy. We started out with some other solutions that just didn't work until we found something that was a little bit more stable, something that was able to grow with us. And of course, those are the solutions we're using now with the Dude. But we literally went from nothing to everything in hand, and then we went through a couple other steps. You try to do that stuff yourself with like Excel spreadsheets, that kind of thing. It just didn't work. We needed something more efficient. And then, of course, the other thing we were finding is especially now as we're getting to where we're having issues with, retention and being able to recruit, is our information is just passing through. Being able to retrieve that information, if it's a new department head, or if you work on something, especially here, we don't have a complete, 5-year replacement schedule. So we may have some piece of equipment that's 15, 20 years old, but what did we do on that? What did the tech do 5 years ago? So we're able to, things we needed to do was what happened 15 years ago. And we just, looking back at papers and books and stuff like that wasn't working for us. So we'll call that the stack it in a box kind of system, is what we were doing.
I hear it a lot. Now, one of the things you said was you tried the Excel side, you had the paper side, and you mentioned it just wasn't working. I'm going to go on a limb and say it probably wasn't working because it wasn't very easy. And if it's not very easy, people tend to not do it. Would that be accurate, or do you think there's another reason why those other paper and Excel systems weren't working?
Yeah, I think that's true. Excel is something specific. It's not something that you're going to see maintenance folks know. Your online folks who are actually doing technical type repairs and that kind of thing. It's something that's, and especially that does at the time too. And not everybody had a desktop to record that information. It's not easy to go back in and say, okay, it's got to go in this cell, whatever. We tried it. And then we tried it too with the paper. Stuff gets lost all the time. Have you ever tried getting a receipt out of a technician's truck and looking for it 2 weeks later? It's the same thing. We were having our paperwork, getting lost from a clipboard, just getting it to the office, and then what do you do with it from there? So, I think there's a lot of difficulties when it requires just a little bit more effort than just recording the data.
Yeah, and TJ, you mentioned something about capital planning there a second ago. Compared to the way you used to do capital planning, it sounded like you didn't necessarily have all the information at hand to make those decisions because it was in a lot of boxes and that kind of methodology. Do you feel like your capital planning has gotten more accurate and more effective over the years? Is it noticeable?
Well, yes, it's definitely noticeable. And one of the reasons for that is just the ability to access an answer so quickly. We've all been in those budget hearings and budget sessions, and if you got instantaneous amounts of time to be able to answer a question. Well, why do you need that new truck? Well, it costs us a lot of money. Okay, well, exactly how much money does it cost? Well, trust me, it costs a lot. But if you have something that's right there on your iPad or something even on a mobile thing, I'm able to get to those questions extremely quickly. You don't have to come in with a bunch of binders and stuff now. So that has helped. It definitely helps when you're doing like a public hearing and you're in a podium and the commissioners are doing your budget right then and there in front of you. You need instantaneous answers. Otherwise, it looks like you just don't know what you're talking about. You can't be general. So it's great to have specific numbers at your fingertips. That's what's helped us the most. We don't have a formal capital forecast plan here, but they do ask specific questions about maintenance cost versus new purchase costs, downtime. Those are things that they do want to know, and we're able to supply that fairly accurately.
So do you, and just kind of in terms of what do you think is next for Spaulding in that arena? Do you think a more formal capital program is desired? Do you think there's other areas that you guys want to kind of keep exploring?
So yeah, capital, we're definitely moving towards that. We've actually been, so obviously we have good solutions. We've actually been coming up with some of our own, like a better term, kind of systems where we actually we look at what is the operating cost, what is the repair cost, and then we go ahead and take a look at the age of the vehicle. We then compare those against everything else, and then we come up with a color-coded system. It's we use a lot of factual things with a little bit of opinion, and we've been working our way the last 2 or 3 years to that system where it's much more accurate. And so far, it's been pretty well received. So I definitely see that's the future. In the next 5 to 10 years, we will definitely be more on a numbers game when it comes to replacement rather than opinion-based.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's great. And I think that actually brings up a good topic here. You mentioned quite a few things. You've talked about vehicles, you've talked about buildings, we've talked about just general work orders. And at the beginning, your title, your position, you guys are over parks, public works, the whole 9 yards. So, kind of talking about the different teams that you operate, right? The different teams that pretty much every city has to deal with, right? When we have fleet mechanics in a garage, the way that they interact is not the same way as my playground inspector interacts with information technology. And I think this is one of the bigger challenges that a lot of people find, is that there are systems of record, there are systems of engagement, there's a lot of specialized tools out there, right? We can go out and we can buy the best fleet maintenance management system in the world, but it's not going to do much for our MS4 inspections. We can do the same thing and find a fire hydrant flushing program that is really just going to be the top of the line, but it's going to make it really darn tough to figure out when I'm replacing that dump truck. So when we talk about these different departments, we talk about these different divisions, there's kind of this line that we have to play with, right? There's a fence we have to straddle. If we go too specialized in one direction, we limit functionality for other folks. But if we go too broad, right, it's not going to fit for anybody, that jack of all trades, master of none. So when we talk about the different teams that you guys employ and the different kind of work processes that you guys have in Spaulding, can you talk a little bit about how, maybe we can pick two, parks and public works, talk about how they use information differently, how they use data differently or systems differently on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so we have several departments outside of Parks and Public Works that use this as well, and we've kind of had to individualize each person's reports and things like that specifically for them so that they can get their information, especially with our Public Works and Parks. We've got some that are using the laptops in their trucks to gather their information. Some are using their cell phones to kind of track their routes throughout the day. and others are coming in the afternoon doing their report. But we've at least got it all centralized to where we've got the access to everything, and kind of customized to their own use.
That's great. Any particular departments that are doing better than others, or maybe on the training standpoint, any particular departments that embraced it more or less than others?
Not really. I think everybody pretty much embraced it, as best they could. You do have the departments that have more of the older generation in. That takes a lot more training to that. So I've had to really, especially with our public works, take some extra time with them to really break it down step by step, how they need to do everything, and they've embraced it pretty well, but it is a lot for them to take on and learn, to just change their system all around.
I'll throw out a specific example where we have to move data back and forth, and what's good about having everybody share the same system. Say, for instance, code enforcement. Well, actually, say we actually have a citizen request app, and somebody calls and says, hey, there's trash been dumped on a road, like a large amount, like a dump truck, construction debris. Well, we'll send that to code enforcement first, that work order. They'll go ahead and get whatever information they need as far as pictures, look for evidence, that kind of thing. They'll actually move that work order then directly to our Public Works Division. Our Public Works Division then, like a supervisor, can assign it to a specific crew that happens to be in that area the next day or the same day. They'll do all their information. Now, the entire time that this is happening, each of these crews and departments and divisions is adding their time and their vehicles, that kind of thing. Then that will go back, after that's completed, it'll go back to our Code Enforcement Division. Now, remember, we're working on the same work order. Code enforcement will actually make a case against that particular instance, and they will take that actual work order to court. And our court system and our judges, when they actually levy fines, they'll levy the fines that coincide with all the information that's on that work order. What's interesting about that is that whole process actually all gets done electronically. There was never any, in-person type situation. Nobody had to call anybody. It just flowed back and forth. So that was one of the advantages we've seen with several departments utilizing the same system. And then, of course, we could go back and see that information based on if we were pulling up a report on that road or that particular location. It makes it really easy to flow stuff back and forth and to reference stuff back. And we're saving money because we're actually getting reimbursed for actual costs.
I think that's an interesting comment right there. Saving money because you're getting reimbursed for costs. And I'm guessing you weren't getting reimbursed because there wasn't enough paper trail or history to justify it in the past?
Right. It would be like a standard fine, but now when you're able to actually prove, we do this like vandalism. We'll see a criminal case which is handled through a criminal fine or some type of criminal situation, but you're not going to get restitution if you can't prove restitution. So we'll start a work order for like a vandalism call, and you basically have to prove exactly what you spent, and this is the way to do it, and you're able to do it with multiple departments using the same exact system. That's been very unique for us and an excellent benefit.
Interesting. That's one of those unintended consequences, I guess, of having centralized data. You realize, oh my gosh, I can use it for this.
Yes, and that's been a positive consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Well, good. Well, guys, I appreciate it. For the last few minutes here, I'm going to just give a little bit of a background on specifically kind of what it is when we had a lot of discussion about technology and systems of record and engagement. So I want to talk a little bit specifically what that looks like for other folks. So TJ and Felicia, thank you guys so much. I'm sure you'll stay on for other questions at the end because I think we already have a couple that have come in for you guys. So I want to take just a minute and talk about what we mean by the dude with operations inside and outside of building. So if you listen to kind of the things we talked about today, there's a lot of different things that have a spatial element to them. I think graffiti, the one you just gave, is a great example. When we have graffiti, right, it could be in a lot of different places. It could be on a dumpster, it could be on the side of a wall, it could be on the side of a building, it could be on a rail car, it could be on a lot of different things and places. So when we talk about data with a spatial element, we're talking about things that are not, truck number one. And a lot of times I don't need a map to know truck number one. I know truck number one's an F-150. Same thing with a building, right? If I've got a building and I've got a mechanical room and I've got a chiller in the mechanical room, a lot of times I'm not looking at a map in order to do that. But when we do bring out a map and we talk about things like park benches and lights and ball fields, talk about utilities like water and stormwater, right? All of this information becomes a little bit too much to just retain in a non-spatial element, in a non-map view, right? When we look at an actual government agency, right, you guys have assets that span across all different types, right? You have a cooling tower there, but at the same time, across the street from that cooling tower is a retention pond and the piping that serves that pond, right? And the water overflow that we have and the power lines that we're dealing with. So the idea here is if we can take this information, put it all into a central area so we can start tracking history, as TJ has talked about, start tracking history against those assets, right? Once we've done that, we take that information, we report on it, we look at the history, and we make decisions based on that information, right? Either we're replacing equipment, we're not replacing equipment, we're being reimbursed for graffiti, we're dealing with the code process and that civil fine fee. The ultimate point being is that increase in efficiency and that reduction in cost, right? The increase in efficiency comes, in that example that TJ just gave, comes from multiple people touching the same ticket, documenting everything into one area. There's no back and forth, there's no looking for lost information. Reducing cost, getting reimbursed for the work that you guys are actually doing. So when it's all said and done, what ends up happening is you have this integrated approach, both a spatial view, that's a map, that's GIS, that's data out in the field, but also a non-spatial view. That's my fleet inventory, that's my facilities inventory, right? If we can visually understand where work is happening on our map, we can correlate work and history back to equipment. We have data that can transfer between different departments and from retirees into new hires. The whole idea is to have that common foundation kind of across the board, right? So for a county like Spalding that oversees everything we've talked about, public works, fleet, parks, right, having a central system in order for data to come in so that these decisions get made on the way out. So very briefly about the Dude Nation, including Spalding County, Georgia, there's about 11,999 or so more customers in the government education space that we're working with. We have about 700 employees located in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we did end a little bit extra, so hopefully we'll give you a little time back in your afternoon. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So while I get those pulled up, I'm going to just pull up a quick poll. The answers will be anonymous. So please give us an answer, and we'll jump into the Q&A here shortly in just a second. All right, perfect. Well, we can jump into questions while folks are finishing that up. So the first one that we came in, I've wanted a system like this for a while, but can't get past the "it's too expensive" from my boss. What advice do you have in overcoming that objection? TJ, any thoughts on kind of overcoming that "it's too expensive" concept?
Yeah, actually I do. I think, with anything, you got to build some value. And I think if you just kind of break this down to where the ultimate value, and I think we deal with this a lot as government employees. We know that it's going to save money. We know that we're going to be more efficient. But now let's start thinking about, okay, where is some value that other people can touch and feel? And if you think about like your commissioners and your county managers and city managers, what kind of information is the most powerful? And that is information. information is something that something like this could provide. It could provide it instantly. It could provide, like here in Spalding, our commissioners and all of our management are all on the exact same system. They're able to access questions. Imagine, explain it to a commissioner and say, a citizen calls and says, hey, you hadn't done whatever to my road in the last 2 years. Imagine by the time that question is actually given to the commissioners that they could punch in that road name and give all of the work orders that have happened in that road. Imagine that the information as far as how much you're spending on a piece of equipment if the county manager is looking at a spreadsheet of what are we going to replace next. I think that's something that you got to key in on. You have to be able to show that it's not just a single type of situation, that everybody can be very advantageous to everybody. And that the main thing is when you look at like being a commissioner or a public servant or something, you want to be able to answer questions. This allows you to answer questions swiftly and correctly.
That's great, TJ. And I want to add one thing to that. Totally agree with what you're saying there. I think one thing I've seen hundreds of jurisdictions justify these types of systems over the years, and I think to focus on any kind of system like this, to justify it as an efficiency tool isn't always the most effective way. I think a lot of times connecting the dots back to the citizen can mean a lot. So if it deals with citizen engagement, if it deals with the speed in which you're getting back to a citizen, or if it deals with taking care of tax dollars, those are the things that get funding and get resources in the government budget. And but if you're talking about internal efficiencies, that's a little bit more squishy in terms of math and ROI. So I would just suggest you focus more on the outward citizen-facing ROI arguments there.
Excellent. So the next question that came in, several members of my team are older and been resistant to software in the past. TJ and Felicia, how did you get your team to embrace the change?
I'll let Felicia answer this, but I will start out by saying sometimes you have to go slow. And now I'll let Felicia answer the rest.
Yeah, so we usually start off by grabbing a select few that are really eager to learn and catch on very easily with new technology. And then as we go, I do personalized training with them to make them see they can do this. It is easy. As well as I have their peers that are already trained and ready to go, who they might be more comfortable with learning from. So they have them in the field also showing them, hey, I'm doing it this way, and it just saved me all this time. You still have to go back to the office and do paperwork. So I think having that influence with them is really big. And some of them, honestly, will never embrace it. It has to be a mandatory thing. In order to move forward, that's just the steps that have to be taken.
Fantastic. I'm debating on asking this last one. It came in without a name, so I'm not sure who sent it, but it says, TJ, are you interested in moving to California when you retire and working for us? So I don't know who sent it, but apparently somebody liked what you had to say. So,
well, I don't own a surfboard, so it may be kind of hard to adjust.
There you go. Well, good. Well, guys, thank you so much. I've really had a good time talking with you, John. Thank you so much. Bill, we'll throw it up to you to wrap us up here.
Good deal. Thanks, Luke. Listen, I'd like to thank Luke, TJ, and Felicia for great presentations they have faced, and you know, the leap that it takes to get into technology, and they're being very efficient and effective using it. So congratulations to them. We'd also, of course, like to thank Dude Solutions for making today's webinar possible. And as a reminder, you're going to receive a follow-up email, including a link to view a recording of today's presentation. If you found this event useful, please share it with your friends and your colleagues. And the end of the event, which is seconds from now, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We appreciate it if you share your feedback on this event, as it helps us provide the content most interesting and valuable to you. Finally, all of us involved here would like to thank you for your time. This is Bill Wolpin, and we look forward to seeing you at the next American City and County webinar.